The city of Riverton had always been known for its hustle and bustle. A metropolis with gleaming skyscrapers, neon-lit streets, and a diverse population. It was a hub for business, culture, and technology. But all that changed one fateful morning. It started as a whisper, a rumor on the streets. People talked about strange occurrences, unexplainable disappearances, a rise in odd sicknesses, and unsettling news reports of violent outbreaks. At first, no one paid it much attention. After all, cities are full of anomalies, and life went on, almost as if nothing had happened. Then, the first attack came. In the early hours of the morning, screams echoed through the city as a group of people in the downtown district were torn apart. Their cries were drowned out by the eerie growls of a new kind of predator, something neither human nor animal. The attackers were quick, their movements unnatural, their eyes hollow with an insatiable hunger. The city's law enforcement responded immediately, but they were woefully unprepared for the onslaught that awaited them. It didn't take long for the news outlets to catch on. Panic spread like wildfire, with reports confirming that the dead were walking. The first signs of a zombie outbreak were unmistakable. Bodies reanimated, moving with mindless ferocity, attacking anything in their path. People were trapped in their homes, unable to leave, as the streets quickly became overrun by the relentless undead. The government issued emergency warnings, advising citizens to stay indoors and fortify their homes. But it was already too late. The city was descending into chaos. Riverton's once thriving infrastructure began to crumble. Panic set in as people flooded the streets, trying to escape the oncoming wave of the dead. Cars collided in the streets as drivers desperately tried to flee, unaware that the infection had spread far beyond the city limits. Helpless, civilians watched from their windows as the world they once knew dissolved into an apocalyptic nightmare. Within hours, the military was called in. Tanks rolled through the streets, and soldiers were dispatched to control the growing horde. But no matter how many zombies they mowed down, there were always more. The undead didn't tire, didn't falter. They came in waves, an unstoppable force that seemed to grow with every passing minute. The humans fought valiantly, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming. In the chaos, a small group of survivors emerged. They were ordinary people, a mix of city dwellers, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, but each with a unique skill set that would help them survive. Among them was Ethan, a former police officer who had seen his fair share of violence, but never anything like this. There was Sarah, a paramedic with a calm demeanor in the face of crisis, and Maya, an engineering student who quickly became the group strategist. Together, they would navigate the nightmarish streets, trying to find a way to survive in a city on the brink of collapse. As the group made its way through the city's crumbling streets, they witnessed firsthand the devastation the zombies had caused. Buildings were in flames, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and death. The group moved cautiously, staying out of sight from the roaming zombies, and always alert for danger. Ethan led the way, his training kicking in as he kept the group focused and organized. Their goal was simple: find a safe haven and regroup. But the path was anything but easy. As they turned a corner, they were met with a grisly sight. A dozen or so zombies surrounded a family trapped in an alley, the mother and father desperately trying to shield their 2 children. Ethan didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he pulled out his handgun, took aim, and fired. The shot rang out, and the nearest zombie fell. But the noise attracted more of them, and within seconds, the alley was flooded with undead. "We need to go," Sarah shouted, grabbing Maya's arm. But it was too late. The zombies were upon them, and the survivors had no choice but to run. As they sprinted down the alley, they could hear the sounds of the undead closing in. Ethan glanced over his shoulder to see a swarm of them, their rotting limbs reaching out to grab hold of anything that moved. His heart raced as he urged the group forward, hoping they could outrun the horde. The once bustling city had become a jungle of death, where only the swift and the resourceful had any chance of survival. Ethan and his group pushed on, their breath coming in ragged gasps. But they knew one thing: the fight for Riverton had only just begun. The sun had long since disappeared beneath the horizon, casting Riverton into an inky blackness, save for the flickering fires that still raged throughout the city. The survivors, Ethan, Sarah, and Maya, had barely managed to escape the swarm of zombies that had nearly overtaken them in the alley. They had only moments to catch their breath before the reality of their situation sank in. "We can't keep running like this," Maya panted, wiping sweat from her brow. "We need a plan." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the darkened streets. He had been a cop for years, but this was nothing like the danger he had faced before. The zombies were relentless, and the city was becoming increasingly hostile. It was only a matter of time before they would be overwhelmed. But for now, they had a moment of respite. "We head for the high ground," Ethan said, his voice steady. "The rooftops are our best bet. If we can get to a building with a clear vantage point, we might be able to spot other survivors or locate a safe zone." Sarah, always the calm one in the group, nodded. "I agree. We'll have to be careful. The zombies are everywhere now, and we can't afford to waste any time." The three of them started moving quickly, using the shadows of the crumbling buildings as cover. The city had transformed since the outbreak. Once a metropolis of towering structures and busy streets, it now resembled a war zone. Abandoned cars blocked the streets, and broken windows littered the sidewalks. The distant groans and growls of zombies echoed through the alleys, a constant reminder of the nightmare lurking just around every corner. As they neared an apartment complex that seemed to be in relatively good condition, Maya's sharp eyes spotted something: a fire escape ladder hanging loosely from the side of the building. Without hesitation, she pointed it out to the others. "That's our way up," she said, her voice urgent. "We can climb to the top and get a better view." Ethan gave her a grim nod. "Let's move quickly." The fire escape was old but sturdy enough to support their weight. They scrambled up the rickety metal ladder, their muscles screaming with effort as they ascended to the rooftop. Once they reached the top, they quickly huddled near a water tower, staying out of sight from the ground below. From their vantage point, they could see the full scope of the devastation. Fires burned across the city, their orange glow lighting up the skyline. Zombies wandered the streets in droves, drawn by the sounds of distant screams, the scent of blood, and the chaos that had consumed Riverton. There were pockets of survivors, too, small groups barricading themselves inside buildings or making desperate runs for safety. But it was clear, the city had become a war zone, and survival was no longer guaranteed. "We need to find supplies," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Food, water, weapons. We can't stay here forever." Ethan agreed, but the problem was finding a safe place to get those supplies. The city's stores had been looted long ago, and even if they found a place with what they needed, getting to it would be a gamble. "I think I saw a grocery store about 3 blocks away," Maya said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot." Ethan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The thought of venturing out into the heart of zombie territory was dangerous, but staying put would only delay the inevitable. They had no choice but to go. "We head out at first light," Ethan decided. "We need to be smart about this. We'll move quickly, stay low, and keep our heads on a swivel." As they began to plan their route, the distant sound of helicopters rumbled overhead. They looked up, hoping for some sign of salvation, but the chopper flew past, its dark silhouette fading into the night. The realization hit them all at once. Help wasn't coming. The world they once knew had already fallen, and they were on their own. The next morning, just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the group made their move. They descended from the rooftop and moved quickly through the empty streets, using alleyways and side roads to avoid attracting attention. The distant sound of the undead's growls echoed in the background, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just out of sight. The grocery store was a few blocks away, and as they neared it, the air grew thick with tension. Ethan could hear the shuffle of zombie feet ahead, the low groans growing louder with every step. The store was just around the corner, but it was clear that the area wasn't abandoned. A group of zombies stood by the entrance, their vacant eyes fixed on the movement in the streets. "We'll have to find another way in," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. Maya's eyes scanned the building, searching for an alternative. There's a back entrance, a delivery bay. It's around the side. Ethan nodded. Let's go. They moved swiftly but cautiously, sticking to the shadows. As they approached the delivery area, Maya spotted a broken window, large enough to crawl through. It was their way in. Get in now, Ethan urged. They crawled through one by one, careful not to make a sound. Once inside, they quickly grabbed whatever supplies they could find. Canned food, bottled water, and anything that could be used as a weapon were stashed in their bags. But as they were about to leave, a loud crash echoed from the back of the store. One of the shelves had fallen, and the noise had attracted the attention of the zombies. Move, Ethan shouted, grabbing Maya's arm as he pulled her toward the exit. They made it back to the alley, just as the first zombie rounded the corner. The survivors ran, hearts pounding in their chests, the horde closing in behind them. As they made their way back toward the rooftop, Ethan looked around. The world they had known was gone, and their survival would depend on more than just luck. It would take everything they had, and then some, to make it out alive. Riverton had become a ghost town, its streets unrecognizable. Once familiar landmarks now stood as grim reminders of what had been lost. Shattered windows, smoldering ruins, and the eerie silence between the distant growls of the undead. But for Ethan, Sarah, and Maya, there was no time to mourn. They were on the edge of exhaustion, but they couldn't afford to slow down. They had narrowly escaped the grocery store raid with supplies, but the growing danger and dwindling options left them with little hope. Where do we go from here? Maya asked, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. The weight of their supplies had grown unbearable, and the constant sense of danger was starting to take its toll. Ethan, ever the pragmatist, scanned the desolate streets around them. They were on the move again, just one step ahead of chaos. The food and water they had collected would last them only a few more days. If they didn't find a safe haven soon, it would all be for nothing. There's a government shelter about 10 miles north, Ethan said, wiping the sweat from his brow. It's our best chance. We've got to make it there. Sarah looked around, noting the ever-growing swarm of zombies in every direction. The city had become their prison, with no clear escape. The shelters that once served as signs of hope had turned into targets, overrun by the undead. Yet they couldn't give up. Not yet. We'll have to go through the old downtown, Sarah said, pointing to a map they'd scrounged from the remnants of a local library. It's dangerous, but it's the fastest route. Ethan nodded. The risks were enormous, but they had no other choice. We stay quiet, stay low, and move fast. With their minds made up, they set out toward the city's core, hoping against hope that the old government shelter was still standing, that it hadn't already fallen to the horde. Every step they took was cautious, deliberate, each footfall a decision to continue living another day. The streets were eerily quiet as they made their way toward the downtown area. The occasional moan of the undead echoed in the distance, but none of the zombies in their path seemed to notice the survivors. Still, the tension in the air was palpable. At every corner, Ethan paused, listening for any sign of movement. Just as they neared the heart of the city, the ground beneath them trembled. What was that? Maya whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. The tremor had been faint, but it was enough to cause alarm. It wasn't just the rumble of the earth. It was something else, something unnatural. The air grew heavier, and then it hit them, a low, guttural roar. Not the growl of a single zombie, but the unmistakable sound of something far worse. Move now, Ethan barked, pulling Sarah and Maya into the cover of a nearby alley. They barely made it in time. A massive wave of zombies had appeared, spilling from the broken remains of what used to be a shopping district. These weren't the slow, mindless creatures they had seen before. These were faster, more aggressive, their eyes burning with a ferocious hunger. And they were headed straight for them. We can't outrun them, Sarah said, her voice tinged with panic. Ethan's mind raced. We don't have to outrun them. We just need to survive long enough to find cover. They sprinted further into the alley, weaving through abandoned cars and broken debris. But the zombies were relentless. As the horde drew nearer, Ethan spotted an old, abandoned convenience store ahead. The glass windows were shattered, but it offered a place to regroup, at least for a moment. Inside now, he ordered. The trio dashed into the store, slamming the door behind them just as the zombies reached the entrance. Their hands pounded against the broken glass, and their low, animalistic growls filled the air. Ethan's heart raced as he scanned the interior. The store was barely intact, but it would have to do. They moved quickly to the back, where the remnants of a storage room offered some shelter. "Quiet," Ethan hissed. "We wait here, and we hope they don't find us." They crouched in silence, listening as the zombies outside clawed at the door, growing more frustrated with each passing minute. It felt like hours before the noise outside began to subside. Finally, the only sound left was the distant thumping of footsteps and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the survivors. "Are we really doing this?" Maya's voice broke the silence, her question heavy with doubt. "Can we survive this?" Ethan's eyes narrowed, a determined fire burning within him. "We've survived worse. We'll make it." Sarah sighed, but there was a faint flicker of hope in her eyes. "We have to." As they waited, Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the shelter. They still had a long way to go, but they couldn't afford to stop now. The only way out of this nightmare was through it, facing the horrors ahead, step by step. Hours passed, and the zombies outside grew more distant. The trio slowly stood, their muscles stiff from staying in place for so long. "We move," Ethan said softly. "Keep your heads down and stay close. We're almost there." The city around them was a war zone, but they couldn't let it consume them. They had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep hoping. The shelter was within reach, but the road ahead was fraught with danger. The final battle for Riverton wasn't over yet. The night had fallen silent again, but it was a silence that made everything feel worse. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on them, suffocating and heavy. The horde had passed, but the tension in the air was unshakable. Ethan, Sarah, and Maya were exhausted, physically drained and mentally on the edge, but they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. Ethan scanned the empty street outside the convenience store, watching for any signs of movement. The city had become a maze of ruins, a labyrinth of crumbling buildings and abandoned vehicles. He knew the shelter was just a few blocks away, but they couldn't let their guard down. Not for a second. "Are we ready?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. He turned to Sarah and Maya, checking to make sure they were both still on edge, still prepared to fight. Sarah nodded, her eyes tired but determined. "We don't have a choice." Maya adjusted the strap of her pack, looking at the broken windows of the store they had been hiding in. "If we're lucky, we'll make it to the shelter without encountering another horde." "Luck doesn't get us through this," Ethan said, his expression hardening. "We get through this because we fight. We don't stop. We keep moving until we make it to that shelter." The trio moved cautiously through the store's back exit, peering out into the darkened alley. They could hear the distant growls of zombies, but for now, they were alone. They took a moment to adjust their gear, checking the supplies they had scavenged earlier, ensuring their weapons were loaded and ready. The streets ahead were deserted. The fires that had once burned throughout the city had finally died down, leaving only the smoldering remains of buildings in their wake. It was the quiet after the storm, the kind of quiet that made everything feel like it could collapse at any moment. They moved quickly but carefully, keeping to the shadows, avoiding any open spaces. The downtown area was a death trap, filled with too many places to hide and too many places to get trapped. Ethan's mind raced as they navigated the streets, counting down the blocks in his head. They were getting closer. Then, as they rounded a corner, they froze. There, standing in the middle of the street, was a group of survivors. Ethan's hand went instinctively to his sidearm, but he stopped himself. These weren't zombies, but that didn't mean they were safe. The survivors looked haggard, their clothes torn and dirty, and their faces drawn with exhaustion. But they were armed, weapons held loosely at their sides. The leader of the group, a tall man with a rough beard and bloodshot eyes, stepped forward. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice suspicious and cautious. "We're not here to fight," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. He lowered his hand from the weapon, trying to show them they weren't a threat. "We're just trying to get to the government shelter. We're not looking for trouble." The man eyed them warily, but didn't make any sudden moves. "The shelter's not what it used to be," he said, his tone darkening. "Last I heard, it's overrun. But if you're going there, you might as well come with us. Safety in numbers, right?" Ethan exchanged a glance with Sarah and Maya. The decision was clear. The shelter, their last hope, might already be lost, but they couldn't risk splitting up. They had to stick together. "We'll come with you," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Lead the way." The group of survivors led them through a series of back alleys and abandoned streets. As they walked, they shared what little they knew about the shelter's current state. It had once been a refuge for hundreds of people, a place where civilians and military personnel alike had gathered in the early days of the outbreak. But now, it was a fortress surrounded by the undead. "They're still trying to hold it," the leader said. "But I don't know how much longer it will last." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into a city already claimed by the dead. But they couldn't stop. They couldn't turn back. As they approached the shelter, they saw the first signs of its defense. The barricades were thick, reinforced with steel and concrete, and soldiers were stationed at every possible entry point. The entire area was a fortified compound, but the sounds of gunfire and distant screams told a different story. The shelter was under siege. "Damn it," the leader muttered. "They're coming in." The survivors picked up the pace, rushing toward the entrance. Ethan, Sarah, and Maya followed closely behind, their hearts pounding with both fear and hope. They had made it this far, and there was no turning back now. But as they neared the gates, the ground shook again. This time it wasn't just a rumble, it was the full force of the undead, drawn in by the noise, the chaos, the scent of blood. "Move," Ethan shouted. "Get inside now." The group sprinted toward the gates, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the zombies were closing in faster than they could run. The sound of their growls filled the air as they followed, an unrelenting wave of death. Just as they reached the gates, the soldiers fired. The heavy gates creaked open, and they were pulled inside. The gates slammed shut behind them with a deafening clang, and for a moment, everything went still. They had made it. For now, inside the shelter, the survivors were greeted with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had survived, but the war wasn't over. The shelter's defenses were still holding, but how long would that last? Ethan knew the answer. The zombies were relentless. They would never stop. The survivors huddled together in the shelter's dimly lit interior, surrounded by other civilians and soldiers who were doing everything they could to hold the line. There was no celebration, no cheers, only the weight of survival, the knowledge that the battle for Riverton was far from over. "We're safe," Sarah whispered, her voice quiet but resolute. For now, Ethan thought. For now. But in a world where the dead never rested, the fight was never truly over.